Confidence is the shortest path to a fatal mistake. We often ignore safety protocols assuming they don't apply to us, but the laws of physics offer no mercy. Today, we break down 6 cases where overconfidence became a person's final choice. Disclaimer: this is a technical analysis of fatal errors meant to serve as a survival warning. Do not replicate any of this. Let's witness how thin the line is between life and catastrophe. August 2009, the towering steel skeleton of an abandoned railway bridge casts a long, dark shadow. A dry, cracked riverbed waits exactly 40 meters below. It is a blistering, still summer afternoon. The oppressive seasonal heat radiates powerfully from the rusted iron girders. Far below, jagged gray stones rest in total silence. 30-year-old extreme sports enthusiast David stands on the edge of the massive drop. He is focused entirely on his ultimate thrill-seeking goal today. He plans to perform an unauthorized base jump from the towering structure. He feels a massive surge of adrenaline and absolute confidence. He spent the last 3 weeks meticulously building his own custom jumping equipment. He did not buy a professional, factory-tested shock cord. Instead, he braided together 80 standard elastic luggage straps from a local hardware store. He bound them tightly with heavy duct tape and thick plastic zip ties. He securely attached one end to the heavy steel bridge railing. He strapped the other end to a homemade climbing harness around his waist. He firmly believes his amateur backyard engineering is flawless. A standard commercial bungee system strictly relies on a highly calibrated latex rubber core. These expensive professional cords are mathematically designed to absorb extreme kinetic energy smoothly. David relies entirely on cheap woven nylon and very thin rubber strips. These cheap luggage cords are designed solely to hold light suitcases on car roofs. He made a fatal miscalculation in his very basic physics assumptions. He carefully calculated only his static weight. Static weight is simply how heavy a person is while standing perfectly still. He weighed exactly 180 pounds. He figured 80 cheap stretch cords could easily hold a stationary 200-pound load. But he completely ignored the brutal reality of kinetic energy. Kinetic energy is the massive, multiplying downward force created by a rapidly falling object. When a human body freely drops 40 meters, gravity constantly accelerates its mass. This deadly acceleration quickly turns a lightweight man into thousands of pounds of downward force. Ordinary bungee cords are engineered to stretch slightly and snap back. They are not designed to arrest the terminal velocity of a falling human. The hot summer sun beats down as David steps up to the iron railing. He takes one final deep breath of the stifling summer air. He aggressively pushes off the rusty iron ledge with strong physical force. The hot air violently rushes past his ears in a deafening roar. Gravity immediately takes uncompromising hold of his falling body. He rapidly accelerates downward toward the unforgiving rocky ground. The heavy bundle of 80 cheap cords quickly uncoils behind him. The jagged stones of the dry riverbed aggressively rush up to meet him. He finally reaches the absolute end of the long, elastic line. He instinctively braces his body for the violent upward pull of rope tension. Time radically slows down as the thick nylon cords finally pull extremely taut. This fraction of a second is the irreversible moment of mechanical truth. A brief flash of hope crosses his mind. He expects the massive elastic bundle to violently snap him safely backward into the sky. Instead, the cheap internal rubber completely yields instantly to the overwhelming kinetic load. The nylon fibers visibly groan and rapidly stretch far beyond their intended capacity. They do not safely break or cleanly snap under the extreme downward pressure. They simply elongate completely into thin, entirely useless hanging strings. The luggage cords stretch to exactly 5 times their original physical length. They tragically offer virtually zero mechanical resistance to his massive downward momentum. The homemade safety system wholly fails to arrest his fatal falling speed. David impacts the unforgiving rocky earth at an extremely high, unrestrained velocity. The sudden deceleration transfers massive kinetic energy directly into his skeletal structure. He instantly suffers catastrophic blunt force trauma across his entire body. The extreme impact energy causes immediate, fatal structural failure to his delicate internal organs. Complete, irreversible loss of consciousness occurs at the exact millisecond of hard ground impact. The massive systemic physical trauma rapidly leads to immediate human cardiac arrest. A heavy, completely dry cloud of dirt dust slowly settles around the highly silent impact zone. The ruined bundle of 80 overstretched cords slowly hangs limply from the towering iron bridge. The cheap elastic fibers gently twist in the warm summer breeze. The brightly colored metal luggage hooks softly clink against the rusted pillars. They stand quietly as a silent testament to a deadly misunderstanding of basic physics. February 2009. A massive, homemade wind turbine dominates a quiet, frozen suburban backyard. The sky above is a flat winter gray. The biting air smells faintly of wood smoke and approaching snow. The machine solidly towers 30 feet in the air on a thick steel pipe. 3 hand-carved wooden blades are bolted securely to an old truck alternator. 35-year-old amateur mechanic Mark proudly watches his creation through his frosted kitchen window. He is a self-taught handyman with a deep interest in off-grid energy. He spent the entire winter welding the steel frame and balancing the wooden blades. Each solid timber blade weighs exactly 40 pounds. He built this towering machine to power his detached backyard workshop. He feels a massive sense of accomplishment as the heavy blades turn lazily today. However, his custom design harbors a severely fatal, totally hidden mechanical flaw. A standard commercial wind turbine features a critical automatic safety mechanism. It uses a governed braking system to automatically lock the spinning rotor. This crucial mechanical brake engages automatically during severe weather or dangerous wind events. Mark decided to save money and skip this expensive safety feature. He wrongly assumed the heavy electrical alternator would steadily provide enough magnetic resistance. He believed this simple friction would easily keep the rotational speed safely manageable. He critically underestimated the entirely exponential natural power of rapidly moving air. Wind power is not a steady, linear mathematical equation. The raw kinetic energy strictly operates on a brutal principle called the cube law. If the raw wind speed simply doubles, the physical power it exerts increases by a factor of 8. This rapidly escalating power creates massive, uncontrollable spinning centrifugal force. Centrifugal force is the strong outward push that violently pulls things away from a spinning center. Without a reliable mechanical brake, the heavy wooden blades will quickly spin faster. The spinning physical mass will eventually exceed the yield strength of the mounting bolts. A sudden freezing winter squall unexpectedly hits the quiet suburban neighborhood. Atmospheric pressure dramatically drops as a severe cold front moves in. The ambient wind speed aggressively jumps from 10 to over 50 miles per hour. The heavy wooden blades instantly blur into a terrifying, solid spinning gray disc. The towering steel mast aggressively begins to violently vibrate under the extreme aerodynamic load. A high-pitched mechanical screech ominously echoes across the frozen yard. Mark clearly sees the immediate structural danger from his warm kitchen window. He realizes his backyard machine is quickly tearing itself apart. He makes a terribly fatal decision to physically intervene directly with the machine. He frantically kicks open his back door and rapidly rushes out into the freezing wind. He urgently intends to manually engage a simple makeshift friction lever near the tower base. The howling winter wind forcefully drowns out the terrifying sounds of bending metal. Time dramatically dilates as he swiftly takes 5 rapid steps across the frozen grass. He forcefully reaches out his gloved right hand toward the vibrating steel mast. A brief, fleeting moment of pure hope exists that he can manually halt the disaster. But the homemade turbine has already spun entirely out of all safe mechanical control. The extreme rotational speed effortlessly generates thousands of pounds of outward pulling force. The 4 heavy steel bolts securely holding one wooden blade reach their absolute breaking point. The thick metal brackets aggressively shear off completely with a deafening, sharp metal crack. The violent centrifugal force instantly detaches the heavy 40-pound solid timber blade. It violently launches outward exactly like a heavy metal artillery shell fired from a cannon. The massive projectile firmly travels forcefully through the freezing air at over 100 miles per hour. The solid timber powerfully strikes Mark squarely in the soft upper torso. The massive, forceful transfer of fast kinetic energy causes instant, catastrophic blunt force trauma. The sudden physical impact force thoroughly compromises his fragile rib cage and vital internal organs. He suffers non-survivable structural failure upon violent contact. The overwhelming blunt force bodily shock causes his human heart to entirely stop functioning instantly. Mark immediately collapses lifelessly onto the deeply frozen, snow-covered quiet suburban lawn. The sudden physical loss of a blade rapidly causes the heavy turbine to become wildly unbalanced. The massive metal machine violently shakes itself completely apart in a matter of mere seconds. The two remaining heavy blades brutally smash into the steel mast and rapidly shatter. Sharp, jagged wooden splinters violently rain down directly across the frozen yard. The tall steel tower dangerously bends and loudly groans under the highly destructive mechanical vibration. The sudden, eerie yard silence is quickly broken, strictly only by the cold winter wind. It remains a cold, silent monument to the lethal forces of untested backyard engineering. October 2013, a massive green diesel tractor smoothly idles in the fading afternoon light of an isolated rural farm. The heavy machine generates a strong smell of diesel exhaust that mixes with the scent of freshly cut oak. 55-year-old experienced farmer Arthur stands confidently directly behind the active machinery. He is a practical, deeply stubborn man who strictly prefers repairing his own heavy farm equipment. He is focused on quickly splitting a massive pile of hard winter firewood before sunset. He specifically attached a dangerous, completely homemade mechanical screw cone log splitter directly to the tractor. This heavy steel cone uses a sharp, aggressive spiral thread to brutally force solid wood apart. The heavy cone is powered strictly by the mechanical power takeoff shaft located at the rear of the tractor. The power takeoff, or PTO, is a heavy, completely solid steel drive shaft. It efficiently transfers massive raw engine power directly from the tractor to any attached implement. A standard factory PTO shaft strictly features a crucial, completely independent freewheeling plastic safety shield. This completely smooth plastic tube safely covers the spinning steel. It entirely prevents accidental human contact with the aggressive metal machinery. Arthur made a fatal mechanical decision 3 years ago during a routine maintenance check. He found the protective plastic shield annoying and completely removed it from the heavy steel shafts. He intentionally left the highly grooved solid steel driveline totally exposed to the open air. He critically underestimated the completely unforgiving, massive physical nature of mechanical rotational torque. Torque is the absolute twisting physical force generated by a powerful machine. The heavy tractor engine effortlessly forces the completely exposed steel shaft to spin rapidly. It tightly rotates at exactly 540 revolutions per minute. This massive speed mathematically strictly equates to exactly 9 complete, highly violent physical rotations every single second. This powerful mechanical system absolutely does not possess a sensitive automatic stall feature. It absolutely will not safely stop spinning if it encounters sudden, unexpected physical resistance. Arthur confidently reaches across the violently spinning steel shaft to quickly grab another heavy oak log. He totally ignores the basic, entirely fundamental safety rules of working around active, heavy machinery. He is wearing a highly comfortable, loose-fitting, heavy canvas winter work jacket to fight the autumn chill. A brief, highly sudden gust of autumn wind slightly shifts his thick, loose jacket sleeve. The heavy, durable canvas fabric lightly brushes directly against the violently spinning, heavily grooved steel shaft. This brief moment of fatal physical contact is the point of no return. Time radically physically dilates as the heavy mechanical torque instantly aggressively grips the strong canvas fibers. The massively powerful, highly spinning steel shaft totally catches the loose fabric in a fraction of a millisecond. The immense, unstoppable mechanical rotational force aggressively begins to rapidly wind the thick jacket directly around the steel. The incredibly fast 9 revolutions per second forcefully acts strictly as a massive mechanical winch. A brief, fleeting flash of pure panic occurs as Arthur desperately attempts to violently pull his trapped arm back. He absolutely cannot successfully overcome the totally massive horsepower of the heavy diesel engine. The spinning solid steel shaft creates a powerful, uncontrollable mechanical pull on the canvas jacket. The sudden mechanical compression transfers massive kinetic energy directly into his skeletal structure. He instantly suffers catastrophic, blunt force trauma across his entire thoracic cavity. The extreme physical impact energy instantly causes highly fatal structural failure to his ribcage and vital internal organs. Complete, totally irreversible, physical loss of consciousness successfully occurs at the exact millisecond of violent mechanical compression. The massive, fully systemic, catastrophic physical trauma rapidly leads to immediate, totally irreversible human cardiac arrest. The heavy, powerful green diesel tractor easily continues to smoothly idle in the quiet autumn air. The sharp steel cone silently continues to rapidly spin flawlessly in the fading afternoon light. The entirely active heavy farm machine quietly stands as a highly deadly mechanical monument to deeply fatal human complacency. June 2013. A cluttered suburban garage smells sharply of hot dust and burning steel. A massive, custom steel crucible glows with an angry orange light. 42-year-old amateur metalworker Robert stands right beside his homemade backyard foundry. He is melting down heavy car parts to carefully cast new aluminum engine blocks. He wears thick leather welding gloves and a heavy canvas shop apron. He feels absolutely secure in his usual weekend routine. The thick welded pot securely holds 30 pounds of completely liquefied aluminum. The glowing metal is holding steady at exactly 700 degrees Celsius. At this incredibly extreme heat, solid metal flows exactly like glowing orange water. Robert casually uses long steel tongs to feed broken car parts into the pot. He firmly believes he is safely controlling the massive thermal energy, but he is entirely unaware of an invisible, highly deadly physical threat. Safe backyard metal casting strictly requires all added scrap metal to be absolutely bone dry. Introducing even a tiny drop of liquid moisture into a molten metal bath causes an absolute disaster. When cold water contacts 700-degree liquid metal, it does not just safely boil away. It instantly flashes violently into superheated, highly pressurized steam. This sudden phase change makes the liquid water expand exactly 1,600 times its original size. If this massive expansion happens underneath the heavy surface of liquid metal, it acts strictly like a bomb. The rapidly expanding steam violently forces the heavy molten liquid upward at extreme speeds. This instantaneous mechanical event is scientifically known as a classic steam explosion. Robert picks up a hollow, tubular piece of aluminum suspension scrapped from a cold discard pile. He completely fails to notice that this specific hollow tube was previously sitting outside in the rain. A tiny fatal pocket of rainwater remains firmly trapped deep inside the dark metal cavity. He confidently tosses the heavy aluminum tube directly into the glowing orange liquid bath. The cold metal tube rapidly sinks completely beneath the heavy surface of the deep molten aluminum. Time radically slows down as the trapped hidden moisture fully contacts the extreme thermal heat. The hidden drops of cold water violently flash into pressurized steam in a single millisecond. The tiny amount of moisture expands 1,600 times inside the submerged metal tube. The massive, sudden steam bubble mathematically has nowhere to safely go, but violently straight up. The sudden internal pneumatic pressure forcefully ejects the liquid metal into the air. A solid, devastating 10-foot-tall column of glowing molten aluminum erupts directly out of the steel crucible. The superheated liquid metal forcefully impacts the protective gear and work area. The massive thermal transfer instantly burns directly through his basic protective canvas apron with terrifying ease. He immediately suffers catastrophic thermal shock across his upper body. The extreme, unrestrained, sudden thermal energy instantly causes fatal structural failure to his vital respiratory system. The overwhelming physical trauma rapidly triggers an immediate, irreversible cardiac arrest. A sudden, systemic drop in vital functions occurs due to extreme thermal exposure. He heavily collapses lifelessly directly onto the dusty, cold concrete garage floor. The violent, sudden shower of glowing liquid aluminum rapidly spreads directly across the cold concrete ground. The highly bright orange liquid metal slowly cools and gently hardens into completely solid silver puddles. The thick, heavy steel crucible quietly radiates intense physical heat in the completely silent suburban garage. The active heavy foundry equipment quietly stands as a highly deadly mechanical monument to unforgiving thermal physics. October 2006. 24-year-old amateur mechanic Brian is rapidly speeding down an isolated stretch of paved suburban asphalt. The crisp autumn air carries the sharp smell of unburnt two-stroke engine oil strictly from his highly dangerous custom vehicle. He sits confidently astride a standard, lightweight aluminum mountain bicycle. He specifically modified this simple pedal bike to achieve completely unsafe operating speeds. He bolted a massive, powerful two-stroke engine from a professional logging chainsaw directly onto the frame. He connected the chainsaw drive gear to the rear bicycle wheel sprocket. He used a standard, basic bicycle drive chain to link the two entirely unmatched mechanical systems. He is thrilled by the loud, aggressive screaming sound of the logging motor. He twists the modified throttle handle and rapidly accelerates to exactly 70 kilometers per hour. He feels a massive rush of adrenaline in total vehicular control. However, his homemade mechanical drive system strictly harbors a highly fatal, entirely hidden structural flaw. A standard bicycle drive chain is mathematically designed entirely for extremely slow human pedaling power. It is physically engineered to safely handle roughly 100 total revolutions per minute. A highly powerful, heavy logging chainsaw engine mathematically operates at well over 10,000 revolutions per minute. The basic bicycle chain totally lacks the crucial physical tensile strength for this extreme mechanical velocity. It also absolutely lacks the continuous, heavy oil lubrication required to survive extreme high-speed metal friction. A real motorized motorcycle chain operates with a constant supply of oil to safely dissipate severe heat. As Brian firmly holds the heavy throttle wide open, the totally dry metal chain aggressively overheats. The extreme metal-on-metal friction quickly destroys the extremely thin factory grease located on the inner steel pins. The bare, highly hot metal links rapidly begin to physically bind and strongly warp under intense stress. Time radically slows down as he smoothly approaches the maximum velocity of exactly 70 kilometers per hour. A single, deeply overheated metal chain link abruptly jams directly against the rapidly spinning rear wheel sprocket. The extreme mechanical engine torque rapidly meets the suddenly jammed metal link with absolutely zero forgiveness. The immense pulling force exceeds the structural yield strength of the thin steel chain. The highly taut metal drive chain violently snaps completely in half directly under the massive physical tension. The totally broken, incredibly heavy metal chain is instantly violently whipped forward by the rapidly spinning front engine gear. It totally acts exactly like a massive, incredibly sharp kinetic steel whip cutting directly through the air. The violently flying heavy metal chain easily punches directly through the highly thin plastic factory chain guard. It violently strikes Brian directly in the lower right leg with completely extreme, unrestrained forward kinetic force. The massive, forceful transfer of fast kinetic energy instantly causes catastrophic blunt force trauma. The extreme physical impact strictly compromises his major femoral artery. The system suffers immediate, non-survivable structural failure during the mechanical event. The rapid, massive drop in internal blood pressure triggers an immediate physiological collapse. Complete irreversible loss of consciousness occurs within a brief matter of mere seconds. He entirely immediately loses all physical manual control of the highly speeding, rapidly shaking bicycle handlebars. The rapidly speeding heavy vehicle completely violently crashes them directly onto the hard, totally unforgiving, black asphalt road surface. The sudden, highly aggressive, physical heavy impact strictly and easily compounds the completely fatal arterial bodily injury. The completely ruined custom bicycle slowly slides to a total halt directly on the cold road pavement. The extremely loud, completely highly powerful, heavy two-stroke logging engine totally smoothly idles in the nearby roadside grass. The completely broken, heavy steel metal chain safely rests completely undisturbed on the damp autumn leaves. It remains a cold, silent, mechanical monument to the hazards of untested backyard engineering. June 2012, 28-year-old amateur builder Greg stands at the absolute top of a massive wooden structure. He is a passionate thrill seeker, completely focused on achieving a dangerous aerial jump into a deeply isolated natural lake. The afternoon sun beats down on the cold, still water waiting far below. He is a passionate thrill seeker with total, unwavering confidence in his own backyard engineering skills. He spent the entire spring constructing a towering, 70-foot-long wooden water slide. He built it directly down a highly steep dirt hill near his family cabin. The steeply angled chute curves sharply at the bottom. It finally ends in a high, upward-angled wooden launch ramp. This specific ramp is mathematically designed to rapidly launch a rider high into the air. The ultimate goal is a highly safe, deep water splashdown. The designated landing zone is a 30-foot expanse of safe, deep water. Greg successfully tested the wooden slide yesterday with only normal running water. He enjoyed a completely safe, highly predictable 10-foot flight directly into the center of the deep lake. But today, he aggressively seeks a much larger thrill in a much longer aerial jump. He makes a fundamentally fatal decision to artificially manipulate the basic physics of the wooden chute. He entirely ignores standard aquatic safety materials. He proudly purchases several heavy cans of industrial-grade Teflon spray. Teflon is a highly advanced synthetic polymer. It is specifically designed to completely eliminate mechanical friction between sliding surfaces. Friction is the invisible natural force that actively resists motion. It safely and reliably slows moving objects down. By thoroughly coating the entire 70-foot wooden chute with slick industrial Teflon, Greg entirely removes this crucial braking force. He totally fails to mathematically recalculate his entirely new ballistic trajectory. Ballistic trajectory is the highly predictable physical path a flying object takes strictly under the influence of momentum. In standard physics, the physical distance a launched object travels is directly tied to its initial launch speed. If a rider simply doubles their launch velocity, their total forward flight distance mathematically quadruples. Greg eagerly steps into the slick, heavily coated wooden chute. He actively turns on a heavy water hose to fully lubricate the highly modified synthetic surface. He aggressively pushes off the high-top platform with a massive surge of physical force. Gravity instantly takes absolute, uncompromising control of his rapidly accelerating human body. Without the natural braking force of surface friction, his downward physical speed exponentially multiplies in mere seconds. The rushing wind violently roars completely in his ears as he rockets down the slick chute. He successfully reaches the upward wooden ramp at exactly twice his previously tested safe velocity. He forcefully hits the highly curved wooden launch angle. He violently shoots upward into the warm summer air like a human cannonball. Time radically dilates as he totally clears the intended safe landing zone in a mere fraction of a second. A brief, fleeting moment of pure panic registers as he looks directly down at the rapidly passing water. He effortlessly flies completely over the entire 30-foot expanse of safe, deep lake water. He does not lose enough forward momentum to safely drop into the lake. He entirely overshoots the water target. He rapidly descends directly toward the highly unforgiving rocky opposite shore. The sudden, incredibly violent physical deceleration firmly transfers massive kinetic energy directly into his skeletal structure. He instantly impacts the highly solid granite boulders at an extremely high, fully unrestrained physical velocity. He immediately suffers catastrophic blunt force trauma across his entire body. The extreme impact energy instantly causes totally fatal structural failure to his delicate internal organ systems. Complete, totally irreversible physical loss of consciousness successfully occurs at the exact millisecond of hard ground impact. The massive, fully systemic physical trauma rapidly leads to immediate, totally irreversible human cardiac arrest. The dark lake water gently laps against the highly jagged, entirely silent stone embankment. The towering wooden slide stands completely empty in the quiet summer forest. The discarded metal cans of industrial Teflon spray slowly safely roll across the wooden starting platform. They strictly remain a totally silent mechanical monument to a deadly misunderstanding of basic ballistic physics.
On the afternoon of March 24, 2012, the high desert silence of Prineville, Oregon, was broken by the aggressive roar of a two-stroke engine. The air was crisp. The wind swept across the dry scrub of Crook County. It was a day for work. The man holding the chainsaw was Millard Mel Grimes. He was 62 years old, a respected dentist. a man of precision. Mel had spent his entire life cultivating steady hands and control. He built a career on fixing complex problems in tight spaces. He was not reckless. He was capable. To a man with his level of dexterity, removing a single tree from his property did not seem like a lethal operation. It appeared to be a simple Saturday chore, a way to save money, a project for a man who took pride in self-reliance. He looked at the tree. It was a heavy, leaning giant. It had grown comfortably into the soil over decades. Mel saw a static object made of wood. He did not see what an experienced logger sees. He did not see a biological structure under immense, violent tension. A leaning tree is not just heavy, it is a loaded spring. The wood fibers on the backside are stretched tight. They are like a rubber band pulled to its limit. The fibers on the front are crushed under compression. The tree was a kinetic battery waiting for a trigger. Mel approached the trunk with confidence. He trusted his tools. He was unaware that he was stepping into a kill zone. Forestry manuals describe this zone with terrified respect. He revved the saw. The engine screamed. The chain spun at 60 miles per hour. It blurred into a steel ribbon. He made his first cut, the notch. He carved out a wedge of wood to direct the fall. White sawdust sprayed into the air. The smell of fresh pine and gasoline filled the scene. So far, the physics obeyed him. The system worked. It felt safe. It felt routine. But then, Mel moved to the back of the tree. This was the moment of divergence. He intended to make the final felling cut. He believed the tree would simply tip over into the notch. It is a reasonable assumption for a layman. It was a fatal miscalculation for this specific tree. The steel teeth of the saw bit into the back of the trunk. They severed the only fibers holding back thousands of pounds of tension. The tree was leaning too heavily. The wood did not have time to hinge forward. Instead, the trunk failed structurally. It failed vertically. This is a catastrophic phenomenon known in the industry as the barber chair. It gets its name from the way an old-fashioned chair lifts up. But in the woods, it is a scene of explosive violence. The trunk split vertically from the cut upwards. The rear slab of the tree released its energy. It kicked backward. It moved with the speed of a whip. It didn't fall. It detonated. The reaction time required to escape a barber chair is measured in milliseconds. It is faster than the human brain can process the signal to run. Mel Grimes was standing directly behind the stump. He was in the path of the recoil. He never had a chance to drop the saw. He never had a chance to turn his head. The massive slab of timber struck him. It hit with a kinetic force calculated in thousands of foot-pounds. It delivered a catastrophic blunt force injury to the cranial region. The violence was absolute. It was clinical. There was no struggle. There was no prolonged suffering. The force of the blow was so severe that it caused an immediate cessation of all biological functions. The dentist, who had spent 40 years fixing the pain of others, was erased from existence. It happened in the time it takes to blink. The tree finally crashed to the ground, but the back section remained attached to the stump. It stood as a jagged wooden tombstone pointing at the sky. The chainsaw likely stalled out. The property returned to a heavy, sudden silence. When authorities arrived later, the scene told a clear story. There was no bad luck here. There was only physics. The barber chair is a mechanism that punishes the lack of specific knowledge with death. A professional arborist would have used a bore cut. They would have plunged the saw into the center of the tree. They would have left a holding strap of wood at the back. This prevents the kickback. But Mel didn't know the difference. He only knew how to operate the saw. His death serves as a brutal, cold reminder. Intelligence does not equal survival skills. He was a smart, capable man, but he treated a high-stakes industrial operation like a DIY home improvement project. He tried to fix the problem himself. In return, he paid the ultimate tax to the laws of tension and gravity. The tree on his land remains a phantom memory of the event. Nature does not care about your intentions. It does not care about your degree. It only cares about the math of the cut. And on that quiet Saturday, the math was fatal. On October 2013, the relentless pressure of the London real estate market claimed a victim in the quiet district of Dollis Hill. The property on Uphill Drive was a classic Victorian terrace house, built from heavy, kiln-fired brick and mortar. To the average person, a house like this feels permanent and invincible. But to a structural engineer, a Victorian house is just a brittle stack of masonry resting on very shallow foundations. It is a fragile balancing act of gravity and friction. Stanislaw Maciejanczyk, the 35-year-old owner, looked at this structure and saw an opportunity. He wanted more space. He envisioned a basement extension that would add immense value to the property. It is a common dream in a crowded city, but professional excavation is expensive. So Stanislaw decided to bypass the system. He decided to fix the space problem himself. He trusted his own physical strength and his experience as a builder, believing the house was strong enough to handle a little digging. He was wrong. The project began as a manual excavation. Stanislaw descended into the crawl space beneath his floorboards, armed with simple tools, effectively mining directly beneath his own feet. The specific danger here is invisible to the layman. A foundation works by transferring the immense weight of the walls into the ground. If you dig under it without installing steel supports, a process called underpinning, you are removing the legs of the table while the table is still standing. Stanislaw did not install supports. He just kept digging. He removed the damp London clay, shovel by shovel, creating a void where there used to be solid ground. For days, the house likely gave subtle warnings: micro cracks in the plaster, doors sticking in their frames, timber joists groaning. But the human mind is an expert at ignoring danger. We normalize the risk. On that Wednesday evening, Stanislaw was working inside the excavation zone, standing in the hole he had created. Above his head, tons of brickwork were suspended in a state of fragile equilibrium. Then he removed one shovel of clay too many. The physics of the situation shifted instantly. The soil under the main load-bearing wall lost its sheer strength and gave way. The load path was broken. Without support, the heavy Victorian masonry could no longer defy gravity. The collapse was not a slow settling. It was a sudden, violent structural failure. The entire front elevation of the house, 2 stories of solid brick and roof tiles, detached from the neighboring properties. The sound was described by neighbors as a thundering boom, like a bomb detonation. The building imploded into the void Stanislaw had dug. The collapse took less than 4 seconds. The structure pancaked, telescoping downwards into the basement. Stanislaw was trapped in the absolute epicenter. He was instantly buried under a chaotic mountain of rubble weighing hundreds of tons. The environment shifted from an open workspace to a pressurized tomb. The physics of such a collapse on the human body are unforgiving. The impact caused immediate, catastrophic blunt force trauma, but the secondary mechanism was strictly mechanical. The sheer weight of the debris pinned his chest cavity, compressing his torso against the earth. This made mechanical respiration impossible. Even if the initial impact had been survivable, the inability to expand his lungs led to fatal traumatic asphyxia. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the settling of dust. Emergency services arrived rapidly, working through the night to pick through the unstable ruins. But the house had done its work thoroughly. It took hours to locate his body deep within the wreckage of his own ambition. The tragedy of Uphill Drive serves as a grim architectural parable. The house was not a unified object. It was a collection of heavy components held together by gravity. Stanislaw Maciejanczyk tried to hack the system. He tried to bypass the laws of physics to get a quick result. By removing the foundation, he signed a contract with gravity that could only be fulfilled one way. He wanted to build a future for his family. Instead, he literally pulled his own world down on top of himself. You can negotiate with contractors, you can negotiate with banks, but you can never negotiate with the weight of a brick wall. Water is often perceived as a gentle, yielding element, a source of life and relaxation. But physically, it is a heavy, incompressible substance that can turn into a concrete trap under the right mechanical conditions. On the evening of December 8, 2003, in a quiet residential backyard in Arizona, 33-year-old John Van Hoy discovered this hidden hostility in the most terrifying way possible. The setting was designed for comfort: a private hot tub, steam rising into the cool December air, and the hum of pumps circulating warm water. It was a scene of domestic peace. However, John noticed a minor imperfection in his sanctuary. The water pressure in the jets seemed weak, lacking its usual vigor. Most people would have ignored this, or perhaps called a technician the next morning. But John possessed the fix-it instinct, the confidence of a man who believes he can troubleshoot his own environment. He suspected a blockage in the drain or a clog in the filter. He did not see a lethal industrial hazard. He saw a simple maintenance task. He did not turn off the power. That was the critical error. He trusted his ability to quickly dive down, inspect the grate, and surface within seconds. He took a breath, adjusted his mask, and submerged. This decision marked the boundary between the world of human intentions and the cold, absolute world of fluid dynamics. At the bottom of the tub, a powerful suction pump was operating, designed to cycle hundreds of gallons of water per minute. The moment John's torso moved near the open drain, the laws of physics engaged a phenomenon known to engineers and divers as delta P, or differential pressure. The pump continued to pull water with relentless electrical torque, but John's body blocked the intake. Instantly, the pressure inside the pipe dropped to a near vacuum, while the weight of the water above him remained constant. This created a seal of terrifying strength. His body effectively became the plug for a high-powered hydraulic system. The force generated by delta P is calculated by simple math. Pressure multiplied by surface area. In John's case, the suction pinned him to the floor of the tub with a force estimated at over 300 kilograms, 660 pounds. He was not just stuck, he was hydraulically fused to the plumbing. The horror of this specific trap is that the victim remains fully conscious. John was alive, his mind racing, his muscles firing with maximum adrenaline, but he could not move a single inch. He was fighting a mathematical equation that his biological strength could not solve. His fiancée, standing by the edge, realized something was wrong when he didn't surface. She looked down and saw him anchored to the bottom. She reached into the water, grabbed his arms, and pulled. She pulled with the desperate, hysterical strength of a person trying to save the one they love. She braced her feet against the side of the tub and heaved until her own muscles were at the breaking point. But John did not budge. It was as if he were bolted to the foundation of the house. The pump was indifferent to their struggle. It simply continued to spin, drawing water through whatever gaps it could find, compressing John's abdomen against the intake with crushing force, causing severe internal trauma. But the trauma wasn't the immediate killer. Time was. John was holding his breath. He was staring up at the surface, just a few feet away. He could see the distortion of the lights. He could see the frantic face of his fiancée. He could feel her hands gripping him. The surface was right there, but it might as well have been miles away. The psychological terror of this moment is beyond description. The human brain screams for oxygen. The carbon dioxide levels in the blood rise, triggering the diaphragm to convulse. This is the break point. It is the moment where the body's survival reflex overrides the conscious will. John's mouth opened. He inhaled water. The clinical process of drowning began immediately. Water flooded the lungs, washing away the surfactant that allows oxygen absorption. The heart, starved of oxygen, began to fail. The struggle slowed and then stopped. The pump continued to hum, a machine doing exactly what it was designed to do, unaware that it had just consumed a human life. It wasn't until the power was eventually cut, breaking the vacuum, that his body could be released, but the window of survival had closed. John Van Hoy did not die because he was reckless. He died because he treated a powerful hydraulic machine like a passive bathtub. He underestimated the invisible energy contained in a moving column of water. This tragedy is cited in safety courses across the world as a definitive example of the delta P hazard. It is a force that is silent, invisible, and once it engages, it allows for no negotiation. He dove down to fix a simple flow rate, and the water simply refused to let him go. The Michigan winter of 2011 was a brutal season of ice that turned simple household problems into survival tests. On January 5th, in Sterling Heights, the temperature plunged far below freezing. For Karl Cieślikowski, a resident of a mobile home park, this extreme cold created a critical failure. His water pipes froze solid. In a mobile home, the plumbing runs underneath the floor in a crawl space, a narrow gap between the trailer and the frozen ground, shielded only by a thin skirt of vinyl. No water meant no cooking, no cleaning, no toilet. It was a crisis. Karl, driven by the urgency of the cold, decided to fix it himself immediately. He didn't call a plumber. He didn't use a slow, safe method like a hairdryer. He chose a weapon of aggression, a propane torch. The logic seemed simple to a desperate man. Fire melts ice. It was a direct solution. He put on his heavy winter coat, grabbed the torch, and crawled under the skirting of his home. The space underneath a mobile home is a claustrophobic nightmare. It is a dark, horizontal tunnel, barely high enough to lift your head. It is filled with dust, spiders, and dry construction materials. Karl shimmied on his belly across the frozen dirt, the torch in his hand casting long, dancing shadows. He reached the section of frozen pipe. He clicked the igniter. The blue flame hissed to life. He began to apply the intense heat to the metal pipes, waiting for the sound of running water. But in his focus on the pipe, he ignored the environment. The crawl space was lined with insulation, old, dry material that had been hanging there for years, collecting dust. It was basically kindling, waiting for a spark. He was lying inside a box made of fuel. The flame didn't even need to touch the insulation directly. The radiant heat in such a tight space was enough. Suddenly, a spark or a lick of flame caught the paper backing of the insulation. The reaction was instantaneous. In an open field, fire grows slowly. In a confined wind tunnel space like this, fire behaves like a fluid. It flashed over. The insulation ignited with a whoosh, sending a wave of flame racing across the underside of the floorboards directly above his head. Karl was now trapped in the ultimate primal nightmare: fire and confinement. The space was too narrow to turn around quickly. He was lying flat on his stomach. His heavy winter clothes, meant to save him from the cold, now restricted his movement like a straitjacket. The fire above him began to consume the oxygen instantly, replacing it with thick, toxic black smoke. Panic set in. He tried to scramble backward, blindly kicking against the dirt, but the smoke blinded him in seconds. The heat in the crawl space spiked from freezing to hundreds of degrees. But it wasn't the fire that killed him first. It was the chemistry. The smoke from burning insulation contains hydrogen cyanide and carbon monoxide. It is a neurotoxin. 1 or 2 deep breaths of that thick black soup are enough to cause disorientation and muscle failure. Karl breathed it in. His struggle slowed. His brain, starved of oxygen and poisoned by fumes, shut down his motor functions. He was inches away from the safety of the open air, but physically, he was miles away. He lost consciousness in the dark, freezing mud, while the fire raged above him, heating the floor of his own kitchen. By the time emergency crews arrived, responding to smoke billowing from the skirting, it was too late. They extinguished the fire, but the recovery of Karl's body confirmed the grim reality of the trap. He hadn't burned to death. He had suffocated. The coroner's report cited smoke inhalation and thermal burns, but the true cause was a fatal misjudgment of the environment. Karl Cieślikowski tried to solve a modern problem with a primitive tool. He brought an open flame into a tinderbox, thinking he could control it. He died alone, in the dark. pinned between the frozen earth and the burning floor of his own home, a victim of the desperate attempt to simply get the water running again. It is a tragic reminder that in the battle between human impatience and chemical reaction, physics always wins. The modern power tool allows a single human to perform the work of 10 men, but every machine has a strict envelope of safety defined by physics. On February 24, 2008, in Surrey, England, 24-year-old Gareth Wilson decided to breach this envelope with fatal consequences. Gareth was a capable young man working on a home renovation project. He needed to cut some wooden skirting boards, a simple task usually done with a handsaw or a circular saw. However, Gareth didn't have the right saw nearby, or perhaps he just wanted to speed up the job. He looked at his angle grinder, a high-speed tool designed strictly for grinding metal or cutting stone with abrasive discs. He then looked at a toothed circular saw blade, designed for cutting wood. In his mind, he saw a logical connection. Both spin, so both should cut. He decided to mount the toothed wood blade onto the angle grinder. This specific modification is known in emergency rooms as the widowmaker. It is a fundamental violation of mechanics. An angle grinder spins at a terrifying 11,000 revolutions per minute, RPM. A circular saw, for which the wood blade was designed, spins at only around 3,000 RPM. By attaching the wood blade to the grinder, Gareth was spinning the steel teeth at nearly 4 times their design limit. He was effectively building a handheld gyroscope with chainsaw teeth. Gareth clamped the skirting board, plugged in the modified tool, and switched it on. The sound would have been a high-pitched scream as the blade blurred into invisibility. He lowered the spinning teeth into the wood. For a fraction of a second, it might have seemed to work. But wood is not a uniform material like steel. It has grain, knots, and varying density. As the blade bit into the timber, one of the steel teeth caught a knot or pinched in the cut. In a standard low-speed saw with a base plate, the motor might just stall or jerk slightly. But at 11,000 RPM, the kinetic energy is enormous. The blade didn't stall. Instead, it transferred all that rotational energy into a violent reactionary force known as kickback. Because the grinder has no guard and no flat base to stabilize it against the wood, the tool didn't just jerk, it climbed. It used the wood like a gear track, launching itself backward and upward with the speed of a projectile. Gareth's hands, gripping the body of the grinder, acted as the pivot point. The tool flew back towards his face faster than his neural network could process the image. The spinning blade, still screaming at thousands of RPM, made contact with his neck. The injury was catastrophic and instant. The hardened steel teeth, moving at hundreds of miles per hour, bypassed skin and muscle, severing the major arteries, the carotid and the jugular, and cutting deep into the trachea. It was not a simple laceration, it was a complete structural failure of the tissue. Gareth fell back, the tool clattering to the floor, its motor likely still whining until the switch disengaged. The physiological reality of this kind of injury is merciless. The massive compromise of the carotid artery leads to an immediate, critical loss of blood pressure. Unconsciousness from cerebral hypoxia occurs within seconds, followed by irreversible brain death minutes later. There was no time for first aid. There was no time to call an ambulance. Even if a surgeon had been standing next to him, the damage was likely unsalvivable. Gareth died on the floor of his own home, surrounded by sawdust and unfinished renovations, killed by a tool he had built himself. The coroner's inquest later recorded a verdict of accidental death, but the mechanics tell a stricter truth. Gareth Wilson died because he ignored the RPM limit. He tried to force a metalworking tool to do a woodworking job, not understanding that speed is not just a setting, it's a physical force. The angle grinder is designed to grind away materials slowly, not to bite into it. By giving it teeth, he turned a useful tool into an uncontrollable weapon. This tragedy is a grim staple in safety briefings for tradesmen across the UK. It serves as a brutal reminder that improvising with high-speed rotation is a game of Russian roulette where the physics are always loaded against you. He wanted to save 5 minutes of work. It cost him 50 years of life. The suburban garage is often viewed as the safest room in the house, a mundane sanctuary for storage, parked cars, and weekend hobbies. But hidden in plain sight above the door header lies one of the most lethal mechanical devices in the modern domestic environment. On November 16, 2001, in Springfield, Massachusetts, 41-year-old Samuel Albano walked into this trap. Samuel was a capable, practical man who lived by the philosophy of self-reliance. When his heavy garage door stopped working correctly, he did not see a need to call a professional technician. He saw a mechanical problem that could be solved with basic tools and a little bit of effort. He wanted to save the service fee, a modest sum of money, by doing the work himself. He gathered his tools, likely a standard wrench or a screwdriver found in any household toolbox, and positioned a ladder under the center of the door mechanism. This was the moment the situation shifted from a routine repair to a fatal event. The component Samuel was attempting to adjust is called a torsion spring. It is a tightly coiled helix of hardened steel mounted on a metal shaft. To the untrained eye, it looks like a simple, passive part. In reality, it is a kinetic battery charged with terrifying power. This spring is wound under extreme tension to act as a counterbalance, storing enough potential energy to counterbalance the entire weight of a 300-pound door 7 feet into the air. When the door is down, the spring is at its maximum charge, holding that immense weight in check, waiting for a release. Professionals never touch these springs without using specific, solid steel winding bars that fit perfectly into the casting, allowing them to control the torque safely. Samuel did not have winding bars. He attempted to manipulate the tension using his improvised tools. He climbed the ladder, reached up, and inserted his tool into the winding cone to hold the spring's power while he loosened the set screws. As soon as those screws were loose, the full weight of the door and the stored energy of the steel coil were transferred directly to his hand. He was now manually holding back a force capable of lifting a heavy architectural structure. It is a contest of physics that human biology cannot win. The torque on the spring is relentless. In a fraction of a second, the tool he was using slipped, or perhaps his grip failed against the overwhelming rotational force. The result was instantaneous and violent. The spring unwound with the speed of a gunshot. This is not a slow release. It is an explosive discharge of potential energy. The tool he was holding, or perhaps the winding cone itself, was accelerated by the torque into a high-velocity projectile. It struck Samuel directly in the head. The physics of this impact are brutal. The kinetic energy stored in the steel was dumped into his skull in a time frame measured in milliseconds. It caused catastrophic blunt force trauma, likely resulting in immediate, catastrophic cranial impact and severe traumatic brain injury. Samuel was knocked from the ladder to the concrete floor of the garage, but the fall was merely a secondary insult. The lethal blow had already been delivered by the spring. The silence that returned to the garage was immediate. There were no warning sirens, no smoke, just a man lying on the floor and a piece of steel vibrating on its shaft. Emergency responders arrived, but the nature of the injury was incompatible with life. Samuel Albano was pronounced dead, leaving behind a family and a community stunned by the absurdity of the loss. He had not been doing anything reckless like racing cars or climbing cliffs. He was simply trying to fix a door in his own home. The coroner's report would confirm the cause of death, but the underlying cause was a misunderstanding of invisible energy. The torsion spring is a widowmaker because it hides its power. It doesn't look like a loaded weapon, but mechanically it functions exactly like one. Samuel underestimated the physics of the device. He trusted his hands to control a force that required industrial leverage. His death serves as a permanent, cold warning to every homeowner who looks at a broken garage door and thinks, "I can fix that myself." He tried to save a few dollars and a few hours of time, but instead, he paid the ultimate price to the immutable laws of tension and torque.
The garage was quiet on that October afternoon in 2015. It was the kind of silence unique to a suburban Wisconsin workshop, filled only by the low hum of an overhead fluorescent light and the faint, clean scent of cut pine. This was the sanctuary of Daniel Miller, a 42-year-old man who could fix anything. He had a natural talent for mechanics and carpentry, a confidence built over decades of successful projects. But his latest obsession was different. It wasn't about building something useful. It was about creating something beautiful. He had discovered fractal wood burning online, an art form that uses high-voltage electricity to burn lightning-like patterns called Lichtenberg figures into wood. The results were stunning, and Daniel was determined to master it. He saw it as the ultimate DIY project, a perfect blend of raw power and delicate artistry. To achieve this, he needed a high-voltage transformer, and the internet offered a cheap and easy solution. The core of a common microwave oven, a device found in nearly every home, seemingly harmless. Daniel, following online tutorials, carefully disassembled a discarded microwave, extracting its magneto-transformer. He understood household AC wiring perfectly. He'd wired his own basement. This knowledge created a fatal blind spot. He fundamentally misunderstood that the transformer's output was not 120 volts, but over 2,000 volts of raw, unforgiving power. He mounted the transformer to a wooden board, attached a power switch, and connected 2 jumper cables to serve as his probes. The setup looked crude, but it worked. The system was simple. A baking soda and water solution painted onto a wood slab would allow the current to flow between the 2 probes, carving a dark branching path as it burned. He felt a surge of pride. He was controlling lightning. Daniel was preparing a special piece, a large slab of polished maple, as a gift for his wife. He meticulously applied the conductive solution. He put on his rubber-soled work boots, believing they were sufficient protection. He flipped the power switch. A low, menacing hum filled the air. He touched the 2 probes to the wood. Instantly, a brilliant, crackling arc erupted, sizzling and popping, as it etched a delicate black line into the maple. It was mesmerizing. He watched the fiery tendrils spread, creating a beautiful, chaotic pattern. But the path wasn't going exactly where he wanted. He needed to adjust the right-hand probe, just a few millimeters to the left, to guide the burn around a knot in the wood. This was the moment his fate was sealed. Instead of shutting off the power, a simple flip of a switch, his confidence told him he could do it live. He grabbed a wooden dowel, thinking the wood would insulate him from the thousands of volts just inches away. He carefully nudged the metal clamp of the jumper cable. It worked. The arc shifted its course, a small victory. This fleeting success convinced him his method was sound. He decided to make one more tiny adjustment. As he leaned in, his hand, steadied just a moment before, slipped. The motion was imperceptible, a mere fraction of an inch. His index finger slid off the wooden dowel and brushed against the cold, uninsulated metal of the jumper cable clamp. In that instant, the laws of physics took over. The 2,000 volts, always seeking the most efficient path to ground, found one through Daniel's body. The current entered his fingertip, surged up his arm, and crossed his chest, a pathway that included his heart. His cardiovascular system experienced a massive electrical trauma. The coordinated rhythm of his heart muscle was instantly disrupted, throwing it into a state of ventricular fibrillation, a useless, chaotic quiver that pumps no blood. His central nervous system overloaded and shut down. From the moment of contact to the cessation of all brain activity, less than a second passed. The official cause of death was electrocution, resulting in immediate cardiac arrest. When his wife came to call him for dinner an hour later, the scene in the garage was eerily peaceful. The fluorescent light still hummed. The transformer on the workbench still buzzed with latent power. On the maple slab, a beautiful half-finished lightning pattern was permanently burned into the wood, an artifact of his final creation. His death, and dozens like it, would later lead to a widespread crackdown on fractal burning tutorials, a tragic systemic consequence born from a project that turned an artist into a conductor for his own fatal injury. The evening of August 22, 2015 in Mount Vernon, Maine, felt perfect for a backyard party. A small bonfire crackled, casting a warm glow on the faces of friends gathered in lawn chairs. The air was cool and carried the scent of late summer grass and barbecue smoke. At the heart of this comfortable scene was 34-year-old Colin Edwards, a man known for his easy smile and his love for simple, fun projects. Tonight, he was the master of ceremonies holding his prized creation, a potato cannon. It was the ultimate DIY party trick, an object born from countless online tutorials and hardware store runs. Assembled from several lengths of white PVC pipe, industrial glue, and a simple push-button barbecue igniter, it had the look of a harmless, oversized toy. This universally shared perception of safety was the invisible catalyst for the disaster. The entire project was built on a catastrophic misunderstanding of basic material science. PVC pipe is designed to manage the gentle, constant internal pressure of water flowing through a plumbing system. It was never engineered to contain the violent, instantaneous shockwave of a controlled explosion. The pressure spike from ignited aerosol propellant is a completely different kind of force, one that attacks the material's integrity in a fraction of a second. Worse, the very material Colin trusted had been silently betraying him. Over months of exposure to sunlight, the sun's ultraviolet rays had been breaking down the long polymer chains in the plastic, a process called photodegradation. The pipe looked perfectly solid, but on a molecular level, it had become dangerously brittle. Each successful firing in the past had created microfractures, weakening it further. Colin, unaware of this ticking clock, was proudly holding a functional pipe bomb. He began the loading sequence with the confidence of someone who had done it many times before. He took a potato and expertly rammed it down the long barrel, ensuring a tight, perfect seal. He then unscrewed the rear cap of the wider combustion chamber, took a can of cheap hairspray, and shot a 3-second burst of flammable propellant inside. He quickly screwed the cap back on, trapping the volatile mixture of butane and air. He hefted the cannon, its white plastic gleaming in the firelight, and aimed it toward the dark expanse of the field behind his house. His friends leaned in, their phones raised to capture the show. They were all anticipating the familiar, satisfying thump of the launch, a sound they associated with harmless fun. They were all participating in the collective illusion of safety. Colin smiled, ready to deliver the punchline. He pressed the small red button on the igniter. A tiny internal spark jumped the gap between two screws. The result was not a launch. It was a detonation. The hairspray and air mixture combusted with absolute efficiency, and the pressure inside the chamber skyrocketed in a microsecond. The force had nowhere to go. The potato, acting as a powerful plug, momentarily contained the blast, but the brittle, compromised walls of the PVC pipe could not. The structure failed completely and instantaneously. Instead of a controlled release of pressure down the barrel, the energy erupted outwards. The pipe did not tear or bend, it shattered. The white plastic tube transformed into dozens of sharp, hardened shards, each one propelled with the velocity of shrapnel. The party toy had just performed its true function as an improvised explosive device. One of the larger fragments from the exploded chamber flew directly at Colin. The projectile caused a fatal, penetrating injury. The damage to his vital systems was immediate and irreversible. His death was instantaneous. The sharp, dry crack of the explosion was replaced by an unnatural silence, broken only by the crackling of the bonfire. His friends stood motionless, the footage on their phones now evidence of a tragedy. On the damp grass, just a few feet away, lay the potato, completely untouched, a mundane object at the center of a fatal equation. The bathroom in Kevin Carlson's Des Moines, Iowa home was a small, claustrophobic box. Built in the 1970s, it had no window, relying on a noisy, inefficient ceiling fan for ventilation. In the humid summer of 2011, the room's stained and chipped acrylic bathtub had become the focus of a DIY obsession for the 31-year-old. A professional refinishing quote of nearly $500 felt like an insult to Kevin, a man who took immense pride in his self-reliance and his ability to fix things himself. He saw the ugly tub not as an obstacle, but as a challenge he could conquer in a single Saturday. This deep-seated belief in his own competence was the first link in a fatal chain of events. At the local hardware store, surrounded by bright lights and helpful signage, he found a professional-strength bathtub refinishing kit. The primary component was a can of thick, gel-like paint stripper. On the back, buried in a dense block of legal text, were the product's warnings and its key ingredient, methylene chloride. Kevin, like most people, saw a product available on a public shelf and subconsciously registered it as safe for home use. He did not know that he was holding a can of invisible poison. Methylene chloride vapor is heavier than air, which causes it to sink and form a concentrated, oxygen-displacing pool at floor level. More insidiously, when a person inhales these fumes, their body chemically converts it into carbon monoxide gas, the same deadly poison that comes from a car's exhaust. The project began on a Saturday morning. Kevin prepared the space, putting on rubber gloves and a thin paper dust mask. He thought these were adequate safety measures, but the mask was designed to stop solid particles, not chemical vapors, offering him zero protection. He closed the bathroom door to keep the smell from spreading through the house and switched on the ceiling fan, not realizing it was only churning the poisoned air, not removing it. He knelt on the floor, his head and shoulders lowered into the tub, and began to paint on the thick chemical stripper. The smell was instant and overpowering, a sickly sweet odor that burned his sinuses. Within minutes, he felt a wave of dizziness and lightheadedness. This was his body's first and most important warning signal. It was the critical moment where he could have walked away. But the powerful DIY mindset, the stubborn desire to push through discomfort and finish the job, took over. He was already committed. He continued to work, breathing deeply, his head positioned directly in the accumulating cloud of gas. Inside his body, a silent chemical process was underway. The methylene chloride was entering his bloodstream through his lungs, and his liver was dutifully converting it into carbon monoxide. This poison then latched onto his red blood cells, which are meant to carry oxygen. The carbon monoxide effectively hijacked his circulatory system, suffocating his body from the inside out. His brain, starved of oxygen, was the first organ to fail. The initial dizziness morphed into a state of confusion, similar to intoxication. His coordination faltered. He likely felt an overwhelming sense of tiredness, an irresistible urge to just rest for a moment. He slumped against the cool side of the tub, quietly losing consciousness without a struggle. His breathing grew shallow as his brain's respiratory center shut down. A few minutes later, his heart, starved of the oxygen it needed to beat, went into cardiac arrest. The official cause of death was acute poisoning by methylene chloride inhalation. When his wife found him hours later, the scene was one of profound and silent tragedy. The fan on the ceiling still whirred uselessly. The bathtub was half stripped, gleaming under the bathroom light. And next to Kevin's body, the can of paint stripper stood like a tombstone, an artifact of a project meant to save a few $100s that ended up costing a life. His death, and others like it, would eventually lead the EPA to ban the sale of methylene chloride strippers to the general public, a systemic change forged from preventable tragedies. The old stone house in the French countryside felt eternal, and that was the problem. For its new owner, a 48-year-old man named Jean-Luc, its thick walls weren't a sign of strength, but a prison for outdated design. In the spring of 2015, inspired by home renovation shows, he decided to create a modern, open-plan living space. His project centered on a single, ambitious goal: to remove the wall separating the cramped kitchen from the formal dining room. He was a man who trusted his own hands and his own judgment. The sledgehammer in his garage felt like the right tool for the job. He looked at the wall and saw a simple, plaster-covered partition. He tapped on it, convinced it was hollow and non-essential. This single, unverified assumption was the fatal flaw in his plan. He did not hire a structural engineer. He never searched for the building's original blueprints. His confidence in his own assessment overrode any impulse for caution. An old house is a complex system of forces, a delicate balance of tension and compression. Certain walls, known as load-bearing walls, act as the spine of this system. They carry the immense, invisible weight of the floors above, the heavy roof, and even the snow in winter, channeling these tons of force safely down into the foundation. To remove a load-bearing wall without providing a new path for that weight is a catastrophic act. Jean-Luc saw a simple room divider. The laws of physics saw a critical pillar holding the entire second story aloft. On the morning of the demolition, he felt a surge of excitement. He opened the windows, letting the bright spring air circulate, ready to embrace the dust and noise of progress. He swung the sledgehammer. The first impact was deeply satisfying, a loud crack that signaled the beginning of a new era for his home. Plaster rained down, revealing the wooden studs beneath. He worked with a steady, powerful rhythm, driven by the vision of the beautiful open space he was creating. As he tore deeper into the wall's structure, the house began to issue quiet warnings. A low, resonant groan from the ceiling joist directly above his head. A fine, steady trickle of dust falling from the cracks around a light fixture. He heard the sounds, but he misinterpreted them. To him, they were just the normal complaints of an old building being shaken up. His focus was locked on the task, on the satisfying destruction of the wall. He finally reached the last central stud, the final piece of the wooden skeleton. He took a deep breath, braced himself, and swung the sledgehammer with all his strength. The stud splintered and shattered. For a single, deceptive moment, there was silence. Then came a sound that was not a groan, but a deep, violent crack from directly above. The primary crossbeam that had been supported by the wall, now spanning a 15-foot gap with no support, snapped under the immense load. The entire floor of the master bedroom above, the heavy wooden subfloor, the antique oak bed, the massive wardrobe, detached from the outer walls and fell as a single, multi-ton slab. The open space Jean-Luc had just created was instantly filled with a cascade of catastrophic failure. He had just enough time to look up, to register the dark shape descending upon him. He was subjected to a sudden and overwhelming crushing force from the debris. The official cause of death was determined to be fatal, compressive asphyxia, and catastrophic blunt force trauma. When the thick cloud of dust finally settled, the scene was one of brutal irony. The kitchen and dining room were now a single, enormous space, just as he had envisioned. But it was an unusable cavern, filled with a mountain of splintered wood, shattered plaster, and the wreckage of a life. Sticking out from the top of the pile, almost like a monument, was the wooden handle of his sledgehammer. The single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling of Mark Thompson's garage in Boise, Idaho, cast long, distorted shadows on a warm June evening in 2011. The air inside was still and carried the sharp, metallic odor of sulfur and chemical solvents, a smell that had become a source of pride for the 36-year-old software developer. This garage was his private laboratory, his secret kingdom. Here he pursued dangerous and seductive art, amateur pyrotechnics. Mark did not see himself as a reckless thrill-seeker. In his mind, he was a careful scientist, a meticulous student of a powerful craft. His workbench was a shrine to this belief, with glass jars of crystalline powders and fine metals arranged in perfect alphabetized order. He was preparing for an upcoming 4th of July party, driven by an ambition to create a fireworks finale that would eclipse any commercial display his friends had ever seen. His entire body of knowledge was sourced from the unregulated corners of the internet, scanned military manuals and exclusive online forums where enthusiasts exchanged dangerous recipes. This was the foundation of his fatal miscalculation. He believed that correctly measuring chemicals was the same as being safe. He failed to grasp the vast gulf between mixing a formula and understanding the violent physics it unleashes. Professional firework manufacturing is a science of control, using binders and granulated powders to ensure a predictable, slower burn. Mark's method of mixing fine raw powders was closer to the assembly of a high-explosive detonator. He was meticulously building a series of small, unstable bombs, yet he was utterly convinced he could control the outcome. That evening, he was working on his masterpiece, a large aerial shell designed to burst into a brilliant red star field. He had reached the final, most critical stage, preparing the flash powder. This is the powerful charge that shatters the shell's casing at its apex, scattering the burning stars across the sky. He had a stainless steel bowl on his workbench, into which he had already carefully weighed the potassium perchlorate, an oxidizer that provides a potent source of oxygen. Now he needed to add the fuel, a fine dark gray aluminum powder. He followed his own strict safety protocol. He wore safety glasses and latex gloves. But these precautions were a facade, a performance of safety that ignored the invisible danger he was actively creating. The air in the garage was very dry, a perfect condition for the buildup of static electricity. As he moved on the concrete floor, his clothes and shoes generated a small but significant electrical charge on his body. The workbench was metal. The bowl was metal. The scoop he used was metal. He had unintentionally turned his workspace into a perfectly arranged ignition circuit. He scooped a measure of the dark aluminum powder, his focus absolute. He leaned over the bowl, preparing to combine the two final ingredients. As he brought the metal scoop toward the metal bowl, he performed a small habitual action, tapping the scoop gently against the rim of the bowl to knock loose the last few clinging grains. It was a tiny, insignificant sound, a light tink of metal on metal. That sound was the trigger. The contact created a path for the static charge built up on his body to discharge. A tiny, nearly invisible spark containing just enough energy jumped from the scoop to the bowl, landing directly in the hypersensitive mixture. The chemical reaction was not a fire. It was a detonation. In less than 1,000th of a second, the solid powders underwent a violent conversion into a sphere of superheated, rapidly expanding gas. The explosion erupted outwards with supersonic speed. The blast wave turned every object on the workbench into a lethal projectile. The steel bowl, the glass jars, the hand tools, all became shrapnel. The concussive force struck Mark with overwhelming power, causing catastrophic internal barotrauma. Secondary impacts from the fragmented objects resulted in massive fatal injuries. His death was instantaneous. The explosion blew the heavy garage door off its tracks and into the driveway, shattering every window in the back of the house. When emergency services arrived, they entered a scene of complete destruction. The workbench had simply vanished. Amid the acrid smoke and scattered debris, they found a single, perfectly crafted firework shell sitting on a high shelf, miraculously untouched. A silent artifact of a deadly obsession. The single work light in the garage cast a harsh glare on the scene of a losing battle. In the center of the cold concrete floor in rural Oregon, 52-year-old Gary Jenkins was locked in a physical struggle with an inanimate object, and the object was winning. For over an hour, on a cool afternoon in 2012, he had fought the massive 35-inch truck tire, his sweat dripping onto the dusty rubber. The enemy was the tire's bead, its stiff inner edge which stubbornly refused to stretch over the wide lip of the 40-pound steel rim. Every attempt with the pry bars, every ounce of leverage he could exert, ended in the same frustrating slippage. This wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a personal affront to his identity as a capable, self-reliant man who didn't need to pay professionals for a simple job. It was this mounting frustration that made him vulnerable to a dangerous idea, a shortcut he had seen celebrated in the echo chamber of online video platforms. The technique was a seductive piece of folk engineering, often called the starter fluid method. The countless videos presented it as a clever trick, a secret handshake for those who worked on their own terms. The theory was a brutal application of chemistry. A spray of a highly flammable liquid inside the tire cavity, followed by a spark, would create a rapid, contained explosion. This blast, in a perfect world, would generate a pressure wave that would instantly force the tire's bead outwards, seeding it onto the rim with a satisfying thump. The videos made it look effortless, even cool. This presentation was a deadly deception. What they never showed was the catastrophic physics of a failure. A tire is a pressure vessel designed to hold the slow, steady push of compressed air. It is not a cannon barrel engineered to contain a detonation. Gary's patience was gone. He made the decision to gamble. He grabbed a can of ether-based starter fluid and sprayed a long, unmeasured burst into the dark gap between the rubber and the steel. He was guessing, imitating a process he did not understand. The invisible ether vapor, heavier than air, pooled inside the tire's core, mixing with oxygen to create a perfect volatile bomb. He was now kneeling at the precipice of an irreversible event. He pulled a simple butane lighter from his pocket, its tiny flame representing a disproportionate and terrible power. He knelt on the cold floor, the heavy assembly lying flat before him like an offering. He could feel the tension in his shoulders, the lingering burn in his muscles from the fight. He flicked the lighter's wheel. A small yellow flame hissed to life, dancing in the still garage air. He slowly, deliberately, moved the flame toward the gap. The instant the flame made contact with the invisible cloud of ether, the laws of physics rendered their verdict. The vapor mixture didn't burn, it detonated. The chemical reaction was instantaneous, converting the liquid into a rapidly expanding ball of superheated gas. The pressure spike inside the tire was immediate and astronomical, far exceeding the structural limits of the rubber sidewall. The tire, which was supposed to be the tool, became the weapon. The immense force found the weakest point in the tire's casing and tore it open with a deafening dry crack that was more like a gunshot than a thump. The sudden, uncontrolled release of energy created a powerful blast wave that slammed into Gary's body. The 40-pound steel rim, propelled by the full focused force of the explosion, was launched sideways. It was no longer a wheel, it was a 40-pound projectile, a steel disc fired with lethal velocity. The combination of the concussive blast wave and the direct impact from the heavy moving rim resulted in catastrophic, fatal blunt force trauma. His death was instantaneous. The garage plunged into an echoing silence, the air thick with the acrid smell of burnt rubber and chemicals. The truck, still resting patiently on its jack stand, was a silent witness to the tragedy. On the concrete floor, the shredded remains of the tire lay in a twisted heap next to the dented steel rim, a permanent artifact of a viral hack that had delivered a final brutal solution. Every product in these stories had a warning label, and every one of them failed. If you had the power to write a single, brutally honest sentence on one of these items, the transformer, the chemical stripper, the PVC pipe, what would that warning say? Write the one sentence that would have actually saved a life in the comments below. We are compiling a manual of unwritten rules. To read the next chapter, subscribe.